So this is the studio door. I'm going to be talking with our guest, Lee Mothes, artist from Calcana. Many of you are familiar with him already. I see you have some paraphernalia with you as well. I love artists that come with paraphernalia, by the way. We also have, over at M3, we have a pop-up exhibition of the New Island exhibit. So we're going to talk about New Island quite a bit as well, as these paintings appear. So again, thank you so much for being here, Lee. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I always like to kind of start at the beginning and find out, how you first got interested in art, like when that became a form of expression for you.
Oh, that goes back when I was a teenager.
Let's go back.
Maybe 10 years old, 12. I used to just start, I'd like to draw things I'd like to see. And back then, I was fascinated with natural disasters and house fires, anything crazy like that. Anything where the adults were faced with something out of their control. I think it was just from being a little kid and having to do what everybody tells you to do. So I would sit down and do these drawings of tidal waves and other things that fascinated me, harmed no one. I never had dead bodies in my drawings, just buildings and highways, and the Golden Gate Bridge fell over in an earthquake. And then it just kept me going. I got out of high school, struggled through high school. I was not an engineering or math person, so I majored in art in college and found a path where I was good at drawing and really liked my courses and just kept going in fits and starts through art schools for about 14 years, finally getting a bachelor's degree up in Oregon in around 1980. And still not knowing what to do as an artist. I don't know if I'm going too far along.
No, go on.
Still not knowing what to do or how to be an artist, quote unquote, because I didn't get a lot of background or education in how to be an artist, just how to draw and paint. So,
were your parents supportive of the idea of being an artist? Is that something that...
my dad was out of the picture, so I never heard from him. But he did send me a whole set of oil paints one time from Japan.
There you go.
In the military, yeah.
So that's support.
So I'll say he was supportive, just silently so. My mother was more supportive. She knew that if I kept drawing when I was little, I'd stay out of trouble. So she supported my drawing for partly that. And she liked to see what I was doing. She was there on it. Nobody criticized me for becoming an art major. That just kind of fell into place. I had no idea what else to do.
So you were under these pressures of like you need to be a doctor or a lawyer or anything. You didn't have that conversation going on.
Family was very laissez-faire. I had my mom, and she raised my brother and I pretty much on her own. And she was at work a lot, so we just kind of winged it.
And this was in California, right?
Yeah, Southern California.
Southern California, which I know very well, the territory and the laid-backness of the culture there, and where exactly...
At that time it was just by chance. My mom bought this house at the end of the Second World War on the GI Bill in Sunset Beach, 2 blocks from the ocean, and that was our playground. That's what influenced my ocean paintings to this day. It was just growing up with that kind of energy. I love the waves. And wasn't much of a surfer. My brother was, but I just went swimming once in a while. But just used to watch it, just enjoy. Or building kind of model houses on forts right on the edge of the beach, and the tide would come in and smack them all, tear them all up. Oh, that was just kind of weird stuff like that.
One of my biggest surprises in life was finding out that most surfers were just homeless people with good weather.
A lot of them are like that, yeah. Well, surfing is another whole thing. I've only touched the edge of it, where the culture is, and the experience with being with nature. My brother was really into that. I'm with nature. I'm out there in the ocean, and the waves are carrying me along, and I just really enjoy that. And I see that. And surfers are so dedicated. That's all they do. They travel. They'll book a flight to Hawaii because they hear a forecast is coming in. That's all their money goes into that.
Right.
And
it's a completely submerged lifestyle, no pun intended.
Yeah.
But you kind of did that visually anyway, though. You kind of connected to the water the way, I know a lot of surfers, having lived in Southern California, and I know where their head's at. So don't you think you kind of did that visually? It like kind of became this really inspirational, awe-inspiring, connected place for you?
It still is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of floats my boat, I guess you'd say.
Yeah.
I still do the artwork. Like I have 2 paintings I just finished at the studio right now, and I've got to work on some commissions, but they both involve the ocean, waves, and beaches. People like what I'm doing, so they'll say, "Yeah, I want one with my kids in it, a beach." Oh, okay, sure. So little silhouettes of their kids running off in the distance, and then this great big beach scene. So that's kind of.
And then the tsunami.
No,
no
that's not what they're doing. Well, those I play with a little bit, but not too much. Lately, you know, we've been seeing a lot of tsunamis because everybody has a camera now on their phone. So
Right.
the few, like the Japan one in 2011, I think, or 12, and then that one in Sumatra, everybody was shooting, whoa, and it's scary, it's creepy, you know, it's like too much, it's over the top. So I don't paint those, but I just love storm surf that comes naturally. We've got a lot of it in California. They have this last few weeks. Kind of damaging, but still it's a storm, and you kind of just stay away, you know, you don't go laying down on the beach and get hit. So.
Well, when you were little and you were doing the disaster drawings of tsunamis and the Golden Gate Bridge collapsing and stuff, do you think that had to do with the fact that California's climate is doing stuff like that all the time? There's earthquakes and there's wildfires, these terrible fires and things,
Yeah.
and
The fires always
huge
saddened me
storms
as a
on
kid.
the ocean. And
It's one thing I've never drawn is a forest fire.
nice.
I've burned up houses, but never out
Not the
forest.
Not the, we're gonna leave the animals out of it, huh?
Yeah, those are always sad. But yeah, being where I was, we had occasional storms and high tides at the same time, and the ocean came down our street a couple of times.
Yeah.
As a little kid, I thought, wow, this is really crazy. My mother was a little worried, but she filled sandbags and blocked this little entryway so the ocean didn't come in our yard, but still, it was crazy.
Yeah.
And then
Just
there
today,
were
Watsonville,
earthquakes.
California, Santa Cruz, right? It's underwater.
Yeah, they just had that big storm there. And one time there was an earthquake in Peru, or off Chile, South America, and they were predicting a tidal wave coming in. They called them tidal waves then, or high water expected to hit the California coast. And we did get a 3-foot swell that rolled into the harbors. And
That was like 2007, 2008? Is that the one you're
this
talking
one
about?
was way back in 1960.
Oh, okay.
Because
Because there was a big earthquake when I was in Southern California about 2007.
I missed that one. I've been
In
in
Chile,
Wisconsin since.
started in Chile, it's that same fault.
Oh, yeah. I've been in Wisconsin since '87, so I've missed a lot of the big earthquakes they've had since then.
Yeah. And what drove you to Wisconsin? How did you get here? That's a big
Family.
leap.
In one word, I was living on the Oregon coast in the '80s and met my wife over the counter at a job I had, and we started hanging out, and then all of a sudden nature took its course, and so we started having a family and got married out there, and then my wife's mom and her family was all here in Wisconsin. So we moved partly for grandma and partly for jobs and better schools. Oregon was not the best place
Yeah.
back then for raising kids.
And it's really priced out now too. It's almost impossible. People,
That was another problem.
Yeah.
Wisconsin was more affordable.
yeah,
Even back then.
even back then, yeah, for sure. So you've been doing some really big paintings lately though, haven't you? Like I love, well, one of the reasons that I loved having these paintings with these paintings is because, you know, you had the panoramic landscape and then the panoramic seascape, and there was a sense of the colossal in both of the subject matters, and
Okay, sure.
no matter how different they are as groups of collections of paintings, you know, there is some kind of a symmetry going on for me in them. So do you like painting real big now, or?
I've gotten into bigger. I used to paint watercolors, and there's a limit about how big a watercolor because of the glass and the frame all around that. So
Right.
I still do smaller ones, but I like acrylic for the size I can make. And I just finished one last winter, 25 feet long.
Wow.
A little bit over the top.
How many panels did you make? How did you
It's
put
one
that
canvas.
together?
I ordered a roll of canvas and spread it out on a wall my studio that had just enough space. And this was a commission, so I wasn't just doing it for fun.
Right.
And shipped it to Mexico. It's an ongoing adventure because I thought I could mount it with wallpaper glue. According to this friend of mine in Kokana, he says, yeah, we do it all the time. We hang canvas paintings with this wallpaper paste. Well, it fell off, so
Right.
that was a disaster. Right in front of the client.
Oh, no.
Yeah, but they were really nice about it. It didn't hurt the painting. So we're back to a whole new thing where I'm building a big stretcher. Just built
Right.
it and dismantled it. It's now on its way to Mexico. That's where this is. And then I'll go down there next month and mount the painting on the frame, and then we'll just hang it like a traditional painting.
That's a big painting. What kind of a space is it that it's going into?
It's a big house.
Wow, that's a big house.
And a golf resort, not far from Cabo San Lucas, right outside of town.
Nice, lovely.
Yeah, they're wonderful people. Met them through I have a gallery down nearby in Todos Santos, in Baja California. Well, it's cool because it's a beach town full of surfers, but also growing with people with second homes from Canada, a lot of them from Vancouver, BC.
Oh,
British
interesting.
Columbia. So they come down, build a big house, they need art. That's the case of this woman that bought this big commission. And so that's the biggest ever.
That's great.
Mostly they're about, the biggest is this one up here, the double one. And then 4 feet, it's been average for 3 feet. I like big because the weight is just, I want to get that energy, so I'm going a little bigger than I used to 2 years ago.
Yeah, the colossal, the awe-inspiring, definitely. That's what I love about these paintings is, I mean, I'm an ocean person too. I love living near the water and have spent a lot of time living near the water. You and I have talked about the Caribbean, how much I love the Caribbean and the Caribbean Sea and stuff. But you know, it's really interesting to me, and a lot of artists do this, but it's really interesting to me when an artist finds a subject and that's their subject. You know, I'm not an artist like that because I haven't dedicated myself to being an artist, but I jump subjects all the time. You know, I'm painting about this thought that I'm having, or I'm painting about that thought. But it's really interesting to me when an artist is just hyper-focused on their subject.
I got to interject something there, though.
Please do.
It wasn't always the case.
Okay.
I felt like I was moving into this thing with the ocean as a kid. Then I went to art school and learned about the real world of art. And artists were doing everything but beaches, except a few Sunday painters that were painting beaches in Laguna Beach, California. That was a big thing there, which were great. They were lovely, but the art schools put that down as just hobby art and not real art. So I had this big conflict. What am I doing? And finally, I don't want to say this too much, but I scared a girlfriend away by wrecking my studio right in front of her because I was so frustrated.
Anger
About what to do. I was all blocked up, and she said, "You don't look very happy." I just let loose. It was crazy. Anyway, she was fine, but the studio was a mess. And then I just drew this little thing about a week later in pastel, which I hardly ever use. I never use pastels, but it was this quick drawing of this guy dancing on a beach with a big wave just offshore. And that was like a whole revelation. It was different than a Sunday painter's subject matter, maybe, but it was something that felt good to me. And after that, I started feeling a little better about what I was doing. It was a crisis.
It is a crisis, and I think it takes a lot of bravery because I know exactly that sentiment inside the art world, you know, and I think it is really hard to stay committed to your subject. And I know that you're going to be talking to our student art ambassadors with Marie over at M3 later this evening, which we're really grateful for. Thank you so much for meeting with them. And you're going to be talking to them about how to kind of draw what you know, paint what you know, paint what you're thinking about, kind of is, that's something that that's a hurdle you had to overcome.
Yeah, it happened in kind of at the end of my art school time. It was like in my mid-20s when that incident occurred.
So did you kind of double down and like, no, this is what I'm doing?
Sort of.
Or did you still have to
I wasn't an
struggle?
artist selling artwork at that time. I was mostly like a carpenter, self-employed carpenter in the Bay Area, in mostly Berkeley, Oakland, and San Francisco. In the early 70s, it was pretty cheap to live there. And people were needing carpentry job work, and I'd learned from my grandfather how to fix things and build things. So that kept me going. And then I did the artwork on the side. I identified as being a painter or an artist, but I just didn't have any way to sell it, except I did some drawings. Now that I remember, I was fascinated with the figure in those days. So I did a lot of figurative work in pencil, and this gallery saw some of them, and they said, let's do a show. So they did a show, and it sold out. But I could not grok that this was a good thing. It was all my best work, and it was gone. I was terrible at marketing.
And probably pretty cheaply too,
They
huh?
were terribly cheap.
Cringe, huh?
$300 or $400 each, and they took weeks to do. They were big drawings. So
Are those some of the drawings that are in this book?
there are a couple.
There are a couple of them. You had to kind of go back and recreate that subject, huh? Because you sold them.
Well, I just kept going, But that was a strange thing. Here was the ultimate success, a sold-out show in a gallery in Berkeley, and then I wasn't happy.
You were kicking yourself for it. Oh man. Well, I think that's a really important struggle for. I'm glad that you're going to talk to the students. I think that's really an important lesson for artists. That it can be very hard to stay committed to your subject and know that you know what you're talking about and know that that's where you have to go, and I commend you for that.
Thanks.
How do you know, because I love to sit on a beach and I can't stop taking pictures of the stuff on the beach and more videos of the beach, and how do you know? You must do the same.
Well,
You must be taking a lot of pictures, or are you imagining these things?
Oh no, I go out with lately just my phone, which is so good at
They're so
quick
good.
snaps, catching the moment and the phones are fast, whereas I had a digital camera and it would wait this half second. By then the photo
wave was
lost. The wave was gone. Yeah.
So if
I
you have all
usually
these
look quite
materials, which one do you paint? How do you pick?
Oh, out of the photos?
Yeah. Do you use multiples at once, or do you just really recreate, or what are you?
Well, I'll take a bunch of photos. The waves are all different, but I try to capture the moment when the wave is right up there and it's doing something interesting. And it's hard to know exactly what that is or describe it, but it's about to break, or a backwash has hit a wave and it goes straight up in the air, and I love that, so I'll shoot those. And then I'll bring them home and start looking at them on my computer, and usually after a whole weekend of shooting maybe 50 shots, I'll take 2 or 3, and then print those on my printer and bring them to the studio, and then start drawing something from those, usually in a sketchbook. And the composition and the photos are never quite right, and that's the danger of photography, of working from photos. If you go too literally from the photo, you're going to get something that's weird, and you'll believe it in the photo, but it will not be believable in a painting.
It's like painting somebody smiling and showing their teeth. It just doesn't work. Something about it is really creepy, right?
Teeth
So you
are
have
crazy.
to. So you are taking liberties with it. You are manipulating and cropping and adding and subtracting.
Also, just being there and feeling the energy of the waves and watching them. Sometimes I'll do video now on the phone, and those are nice because I can sit and look at a 1-minute clip, and here's this big wave, and it's doing its thing. So then I can, okay, that helps my memory, and then the photos along with that for the detail. So it's, both.
Well, a lot of people say when they start learning to draw and paint that the hands are super hard and the face is super hard. For me, like a wave seems like an impossible thing to paint.
You should have seen some of the first ones I tried.
How long did it take you to get good at that? How did you start?
It's never good enough.
It's never good enough, but you definitely have some tricks in place. You have some techniques in place.
Well, yeah. I found out if I'm painting a painting of a wave, like I said, I'll start it in a little sketch, thumbnail, sketchbook size, and work out everything in pencil on a small scale. And I know the composition is going to probably work, so then I'll just redraw it in chalk on a piece of canvas and then just start painting. Try to use some thin paint. Here's a secret, so far this is working really well, is a paint called Scuff Defense made by Home Depot.
Nice.
It's an acrylic house paint, and you can get these little cans for $5 each of any color you want. And so I buy a bunch of those and use them with some heavier acrylic to get a little more density because they're a little thin.
So are they like basically transparent, like they're washes that you can put on your house or something to?
Well, they're heavy paint
Oh, they're heavy
for
paint.
floors and,
I see.
you know, Scuff Defense, like walk on it.
Nice.
Yeah. So it's very sturdy stuff, but I still buy tubes. You know, I want those intense, lovely colors.
Mixable colors and
Yeah.
yeah.
So start.
But I mean,
thin.
even just like being able to like layer in the shadows in water, because if you look at, you know, water is one of those things that is, I mean, not to sound, you know, layman about it, but it's so intangible, you know, that the way it moved, the body of it is never really what you think it is, you know what I mean? Because it's moving and shifting and,
Oh yeah.
you know, there's shadow and there's the light,
there's
the
a
way the light
consistency.
affects it.
Every afternoon, if I'm on the West Coast, I love to watch the shadows start getting longer on the waves as they come in. So that's a consistent thing. And the way a wave breaks, even a little tiny one and a 6-foot wave, they break the same way. They're the same shape. It's amazing when you look at them. So there's a predictability, and then I can kind of remember that. And then there's the dark shadow, there's the really highlights from the sunlight, and then the middle colors in between.
So part of it for you is just actually understanding the wave itself, understanding how
Yeah.
the ocean is moving
From
and how it's
years and
working.
years of just looking at it.
Just looking at it and watching it. So has anybody here, have you ever heard of the green flash? Yeah, oh, quite a lot of you, that's great. Have you ever played in the green flash? Have you ever seen the green flash?
I saw it once, I think, in Northern California, maybe 10, 20 years ago. Didn't have my camera with me. But it's so minuscule. It was a tiny little thing that lasted a second.
When you see it, you don't believe that you saw it then. Then you're like,
Yeah.
maybe I didn't see it, maybe I made it up. So the green flash is
You
this
hear a lot
moment,
about
it's
it.
this phenomenon for anyone who doesn't know what it is. When the sun is going down on the water, and just as the sun drops below the horizon line, it sends like a little fluorescent green, like shock of light that's there and gone. It's just that little moment where the sun just finally dips under. It's the green flash, and it doesn't always happen. Like the conditions have to be right for it to happen and stuff. I've seen it a couple times in California, and I saw it once in the Caribbean.
Cool.
A green flash, or you're more interested in the movement?
Well, no, I love skies and late afternoon and done a couple, almost sunsets where the sun is right there practically. But I've never done the flash or thought about it. It's another photography thing. I think some photographers have captured it,
Yeah.
but it's more of a mystery. And I thought, I don't know, it's just something I don't need
Yeah.
to feel like I need to capture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let it be a mystery.
Right.
So I want to talk about New Island. So you have actually written several books, and I don't think that this is all of them. You have more of them than this. You've published books
Well,
in the...
there's 2 versions of the island book and a
Okay.
3rd one on the way. So that if you want to count those, but it's all the same.
Okay,
subject.
so New Island, the Commonwealth of New Island. Have all of you heard of the Commonwealth of New Island? This project of Lee's. So tell us a little bit about the project of New Island.
Do you have a roadmap there?
I do have a roadmap.
Okay.
So there's a roadmap, I have tickets, I have tickets for a train, tickets for a steamer ship. I've got
There's some people here
postcards.
that looks like you're my age and used to go to the gas station and get a roadmap. And now you go on Google, of course. But I decided to create a roadmap of my own island, my own nation. And it's 12,600 square miles, so it's pretty big. I figure the size of Denmark, something like that. And so there's all the roads, the railroads, all the little towns, the rivers, the creeks, mountains, and everything. Just like an old, not even AAA. These were like state maps. The graphics are like these state maps you could buy at gas stations, or now you still get them at rest stops. And And this all started because people were asking me where my beach paintings were coming from, and I didn't have a specific place in mind. So I thought, I'll just create this island and put them all on different places. And so a lot of the paintings in my island, my New Island guidebook, and in the show down the street are of these beaches that you can find them on the map. There's a couple of little black and white photos of some of the beaches here with the indicator where they are on the map.
But this is a fictitious island. It's an imagined island,
Whole
right?
cloth fiction,
Yeah.
but I try to make it as if it were real. So it's not a fantastic place like Middle Earth or something where there's
Right.
strange things happening, though there are a few strange things here. There's a place called Roger's Dreamland that not everybody can actually witness. You have to believe in it, and then you have to imagine something that you want to do there.
Yeah.
Otherwise...
And there's an otter story.
Then there's the sacred otter that used to visit the island in the 1800s. And
So there's a few fantastical things, but otherwise, if you didn't know, from reading this book and from looking at the materials that you've provided or that you've created about New Island, you could think that this was an actual place because of the way you have
there are
laid
a
it
couple
out.
of little disclaimers here and there, but otherwise it's as if.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is an incredible amount of work on this, the detail on the back,
Oh
you
yeah,
know.
it took 3 years.
It took 3 years, yeah, okay. Because like
The original
every,
is really big. It's about twice that size.
the towns are named, everything on the map has got a name, and you just came up
It's
with
an
it all,
index. Yeah.
you know.
Remember maps that were gridded off with little marks? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and A, B, C, D, E. Well, there's an index on the back of that that'll help you find every place on there.
I mean, you even have the ephemeral streams and lakes marked
Oh, yeah.
off, right? So
Some of
lakes and streams that come and go, he has those marked off, and there's an indicator here of like, how do you know where that body of water is? Just like on a map, that might tell you all kinds of, but this is not the only map you created. You've created like the view from satellite,
Oh yeah,
right?
NASA view from 1985.
NASA view from 1985,
These things.
rainfall,
The rainfall
Topographical.
guide, it's a map of all the rainfall, and then trail guide, all the walking paths on the island, that's on the back of this one.
yeah, there's
down in
the
corner there.
the walking paths. I mean, did you study cartography? I mean, I don't think if I sat down to make a map, I would be able to do that.
Well,
You know what I mean?
among the other things I did as a kid, later in my teenage years, I was fascinated with topographical maps,
I can't even hold
and
this.
I tried drawing one of those. That's all right.
I'm ruining it. I'm dropping everything.
Here, I'll get it.
Thank you.
And then to fulfill a degree requirement, I had to take a minor in college, and I decided to take social studies because they had a map drawing class as a fulfillment
Nice.
of social studies. And it was by this guy who was pretty technical, but he encouraged us to draw different kind of maps than a standard map. So if you wanted he told us about different views. You could do an angle view where it looks like more of a view from above, like an airplane, or straight down. So I learned these things, and then it all kind of filtered in. And when it came time to do this, I thought, oh, I want to do a map. So I went down to there's a company that used to be called the Milwaukee Map Company, and they still printed regular maps and drew them by hand.
Wow.
And they showed me this is how you print a map. You have to draw a background, and then you have to put an overlay for all the black and white tiny details. So I painted this huge background. That's where all the color comes from. And then did the overlay on a big sheet of drafting paper and sent both layers to the printer, a place that was very patient with me in Utah, and they printed the map and folded it. And the idea of this came with a museum show in Green Bay at the Neville Museum in 2003. And we wanted to create a really cool program for my first New Island show there. And so they foot half the bill to buy like 1,500 copies of this.
Nice.
And I gave them half of that, and they gave them out. We gave them out to everybody that came to the opening. So they had this program, this map that they could take home with them, and then they could see the whole show at the same time. So that was really fun.
I mean, and you're not done with, I mean, the project gets really complicated. I mean, so I haven't finished it, but I'm almost all the way through this. And this is actually like the story of New Ireland. You spend a really brief moment in the front that says, oh yeah, this is an imaginary island that I'm making up. And then it goes right into everything from the species of animals on the island, right? Otters, and some of these are real animals and some of them are fictitious animals, right?
Well, they're all kind of made up.
They're all kind of made up. But, you know, some of the birds and stuff are real birds.
Well, here's the thing.
The mutton,
The island is
mutton.
in a real place in the world out on the Indian Ocean west of Australia. So you think of Australia and all the, you know, the marsupials that live there and a lot of interesting and unique indigenous creatures. And then, so what would be a little further west? Probably the same thing, given where the island came from. It came from the same landmass as Australia, southern India, Madagascar, and Africa. It all broke up a long time ago. So the New Ireland is the plausible leftover piece of that continent that didn't go further away. So what would evolve it? And then also, how would it have been discovered by whoever over time too? So it all depended on this place. So I did some research about the first explorers, the Europeans who started traveling around there. And then,
Most of whom missed the island, right?
they all missed it, except...
Most of the traffic that's going through there didn't, as big as this island is, they somehow missed it.
Well, it's in between two trade
routes.
routes. So the wind blows really nicely from west to east in south of Australia. So they go far south in a place called the Roaring Forties, 40-degree latitudes, and catch that wind, and that takes them pretty fast. To get back to Europe, they would have to go further north to catch a westerly, east to west trade wind that brought them back down to South Africa and up to the Atlantic. So New Ireland was right in this, stuck in the middle there, where there was kind of a doldrum. And then, so real briefly, the one explorer who discovered it actually went through that latitude and longitudinal area in 1820. A guy named Bellingshausen, sailing for Russia. He was an admiral for the Russian fleet, I guess. And the Tsar had sent him on this expedition to try and claim anything left over around Antarctica. So he was sailing all around. But he couldn't make it all the way in one season, so he was in the fall of the year down there. He sailed north, and he went right through where New Ireland is. So then history changed with him. He discovered the island, and so there's a long story about his life.
But there were already some people there.
There were a lot of people there.
There are already some people there, and it starts with the trade ships, right? What are they? The fleet ships
They were these...
that were taking...
You're probably aware of the history of Australia started with these convict ships that were being sent from Britain. So if you were accused of a petty crime, not a capital crime where you'd be just hanged, but stealing stuff or annoying somebody that
Indecent behavior.
could, indecent behavior, these minor things, you would get sent to Australia for 7 years. That was the term. And a lot of women got in trouble because they were trying to feed their kids. They were displaced by something called the clearances in Ireland and all over the UK, where landowners figured it out that, hey, I can run sheep on my land, and it's a lot cheaper than all these people live in these little towns. They weren't worth it. So they ran them out. They cleared them out, and they were stuck in just adrift in cities.
And this is the real part.
Yeah, this happened. So this was in the late 1700s. So what if one of these ships was blown off course on its way to Australia, and it would have been blown northeast, right up to the island.
Right.
And this happened 3 times. Twice to ships full of women prisoners, once to a third ship full of free people. They were like they had
Going to colonize.
commissioned this captain to buy like charter ships.
Right.
They were a different bunch of characters. But all of it was plausible. What would happen if hundreds of women landed on this uninhabited place, and after all the hell they went through on these ships and all the grief they were going through before they even got on the ships, and here they were together, and they were spirited people. You know, they got in trouble by some reason because they weren't following the rules, And so what would happen if they were just left there on this place? They had a few supplies that they brought ashore with them. Luckily, the ships weren't smashed on rocks. They were grounded in sand, so they could get off and get up to shore. What would happen? What would they do there? So for 20 years, 21 years, they started their own civilization. Then the Russians came. But there's a two-edged sword here, because if the British had found the island before the Russians, they would have sent them all on to Australia.
They were prisoners.
It would have been over.
They were lost prisoners, right?
But the Russians had a different take on it all. They thought, well, maybe we can work this out, because Russia was not a powerful colonizer at that time. But they didn't want to lose the island, so they figured maybe we can team up with these women that are running it. And it sounds like a stretch, but it's plausible. Things like this could have happened.
Well, when you read the book, it's really plausible, and you really, like, I don't know how many of you kind of like fell into that and thought you were really learning some history right now, but, you know. And the real history actually mingles with the fake history,
Right.
because, you know, you start this conversation by referencing the first fleet ship carrying these female prisoners from England to basically in slave labor in
Right.
in,
They were gonna be
as
put to work
punishment.
in
They were going to be
Sydney
put to
or
work
wherever,
in
yeah.
building the colony in Australia. The Lady Penrhyn, is that how you say it?
That was a real ship.
That was a real ship, and that had 131 women,
Did it?
and one of them was 13.
She's done the research.
I actually read all about the Lady Penrhyn, and the Lady Penrhyn was built by a shipbuilding company that specialized in building slave transport ships. So they then, as slavery was well underway, they started figuring, well, we can use these same ships that are double-deck ships and like store all these people down in below and lock them in down there so that they didn't need a lot of staff to manage them up above. You could just have your staff up above, kind of, and just leave those people down there to survive or not, right? And so they were using this, they were leasing these slave ships to take these prisoners. And the first one, the Lady Penrhyn, had like 131 women, don't quote me on that number. The youngest one was 13 years old, prisoner. And any of those women who had children, the children were also on that ship. And then there was something like 40 male prisoners. So it was like predominantly women that they were
Right.
carting off.
That gave me the permission to create
Yeah.
more prison ships. And I read that the Lady Penrhyn wasn't the only one, and it wasn't the only voyage of women prisoners into Australia. It happened a lot. There were more men, of course, but still.
And now we have Nicole Kidman. You know what I mean? Like, she, the descendant of the ladies of the Lady Penrhyn.
Is she?
Well, I don't know, but I would imagine. Hey, while we're making stuff up, you know.
Spirit, yeah. She probably is.
But it's really interesting that how in the book, you know, when you're talking about the history of New Ireland, it's just, it isn't fantastical like Middle Earth. It's totally plausible. I mean, I really do feel like I'm learning something and I have to like stop. And I had to like Google, is that a real animal? And I'm like, there's some like a yellow-bellied ground parrot on the island. I'm like, a yellow-bellied ground
There's
parrot.
a Craig's tiger, there's a Randolph fox.
A Randolph fox.
Yeah.
And there isn't a yellow-bellied ground parrot, but there is an orange-bellied parrot famous in that area, right?
Okay.
So
Probably Australia.
that Australia, that of course
Yeah.
went extinct because of the colonizers, right?
So you've seen the four triangle stamp, right? The parrot, I think, is on that.
Yeah.
That wasn't my doing. Someone else made all those animals up and put them on those stamps and created that whole stamp thing.
Is that right? Yeah, there's an early stamp, like a historical stamp that has the four animals featured, none of which are real animals, but it's, except for maybe the otter. The otter's just an otter, so.
But otters don't live in the southern hemisphere.
They don't.
Except
And then this one
particular
has magical powers.
And this, yeah, they
So as you start going on, the people that build a society on New Island, one of the things that I've found really interesting that you did is that they decided that they were allowed to be gay. That women could build partnerships with women and men could build partnerships with men. Right? And that was just something that they agreed that they no longer needed those constructs, that here on the island with as few people as they had, that wasn't going to work, right? There was no
Well,
point
part
in
of
getting
the
mad about
conditions,
that.
you know, all these women and there were all these guys, and most of the guys were the guards and the crews of these ships, and they stayed away from the women. But everybody was getting kind of lonely, you know, and it was, because they were out there in this wilderness, far away from everything. They had no idea what was going to happen even next week, because the elements were still kind of against them. It wasn't storming or very cold or anything, but food was getting scarce. They had to start growing something quick or foraging. And they figured it out. They did get by. It was rough for a couple of years. But they brought
They go hungry at times.
seeds along. They were smart. There was a supply ship that got grounded too, and that saved their butts really, because they were able to use the supply to get it all off and salvage a lot of that. And then it was a matter of just figuring out how to get by. But social, the whole thing about sexual preferences, society, it had a whole opportunity to start all over.
Right.
And some of the women had ancestors and stories that they brought with them about living in different ways way long time ago, like hunter-gatherer, early European tribes and systems of living 5,000 years before. So they remembered that. What if we tried this that my great-grandmother told me about, you know, or something like that. And so they did.
And there's a whole town for the guys, right?
For a while, yeah, there
Yeah,
was this
there's-
other Bachelorville.
Bachelorville, right? So there's a whole
Guys.
town on the map just
And
designated
they
to
hung out,
the
they built their
bachelors.
own tavern.
Yeah.
Built their own tavern, of course.
A man cave town.
Man cave.
Kind of rowdy.
But then the Russians come, they're scavenging colonialism, right? They're scavenging what they can like lay claim to. They lay claim to the island in an agreement with the people. And then, you know, the wars happen and there's international politics and Britain's threatening them because they figure out that they've got the island and
Well,
they want
Britain
those
was-
English
yeah.
prisoners back, and
Yeah, there was a showdown.
international politics start happening
Yeah.
at the island.
But the Russians prevailed somehow and were able to, because of from what I understand of European politics in 1820s, was if you were a colonial power and you claimed something free and clear, it was yours. And it wasn't to be trifled with by another country. But there were privateers,
Right.
they called themselves pirates almost,
Yep.
who did make some attempts to claim the island. One, a guy named Jack Stanhope, an English privateer, and these guys were everywhere. They were doing this kind of stuff.
Yep.
He lands there and he says, "This is my island. You know, all these women, you're not going to be able to defend it." And the Russians were only there very sketchily for several years because they had to go home and then they had to come back with a couple more ships to build a fort. And that took a while. So anyway, this guy Jack Stanhope brings his crew ashore and he tries to take over the island. Well, the islanders were ready for this because they were always waiting for ships coming by.
Right, because they were
Spotted.
afraid of the British discovering that
They
these
were waiting for the
prisoners
British.
were now living free on this island.
Yeah, so here's this ship with a British flag, and they said, uh-oh. So they wait for the crew to come ashore, they go out there and they burn a ship
Right.
right down to the waterline. And that was a handy tactic, and they had it figured
And now
out.
he works for them.
John.
What happened to Jack?
What happened to Jack? Didn't it?
Russians might have,
The
I
Russians
think
made
they
him.
turned him into the Russians.
They turned him into the Russians, and he had to help build the piers and the docks and stuff.
Yeah, he didn't have a good time.
He started working with that for them. Yeah.
The Spanish dude did the same thing. I forget his name, but he's in there too.
Yeah, there was the Spanish came.
Spanish were all over the place too. The Portuguese, you know, and the Dutch. And they were marauding the world in those
Marauding,
days.
they absolutely were. So as much as I love this, that part actually kind of made me sad because it's like, you know, I feel like this was kind of born out of your imagination, and that I read something that you said that you know, it was this out of this desire to be somewhere else, that perfect place, you know. And then all of a sudden, everything that happens in the real world is actually happening on this island. And I was just it kind of made me sad. I got to the middle of the book and I went, damn it, now they're killing the whales. Oh man, the Russians are slaughtering the baby seals. I'm like, oh my
Even the
God.
otters, yeah.
So even in New Ireland was not able to escape the fate of the rest of what really has happened, these horrible things that we human beings have done to the world.
The island was
I
a
gotta get
shipping
my cliff
hazard.
notes out. But along with this comes all these beautiful depictions of places on the island, from the desert areas to the beach, the various beaches where supposedly these waves are crashing, right? And
Yeah, a
it's
lot of
really,
waves.
for me, it's so clever. You know, it's just so what a great journey for the imagination, and so unique. I don't know that I've ever really seen a painter. I mean, you know, Tolkien wasn't necessarily a painter, right? He was an author, he was a writer. You know what I mean? So he started with this and then made drawings to go along
He
with
did his
it.
maps and all that too.
Whereas you
Yeah.
started with the art and
Yeah, it was first
you went
just
the opposite direction.
random paintings of paintings of random places, and then I needed to do something. And this was in '94 or something, 1994 or 5. That's when I decided to try making something of all those paintings. And then a lot of things, like the civilization, the women's trying new ways of living, that came back from a little bit of experience I had in the 70s, living in a hot springs resort. It was sort of a hippie, not quite hippie place. And we were trying to figure out a way to share this 27-acre place we had, because you couldn't just subdivide it and give everybody a place to build a house. You couldn't do any of that at all. It was too difficult, and the county wouldn't allow it. So we just shared it, and it worked, more or less.
More or less.
Until a few creeps came in and it got over
Right.
there. But for about 8 years, it worked fine. And I thought, well, if it worked there, it could work anywhere,
It could work on New Island.
and on a bigger scale.
Yeah.
So, given there were no other pressures until the Russians, but they were benign. You know, in case nobody's believing this possibility, what if a power comes in like Russia in those days, and they were, you know, the czars had a kind of reputation of being sometimes cruel, but also sometimes very progressive. And Tsar Alexander was in charge in those days. He was trying to catch up with Europeans and become more of a modern Western country. And so that's one way he was doing it. So he was one of the progressive czars. So Bellingshausen was, of course, under the czar's command, and he figured it out. You know, he was an admiral. He had enough sense to think, okay, these people seem kind of strange, but they're running the island. They could help us. We could help them. We don't want the British here any more than they do, and so on. So,
And we can get away with whatever we want to do as far as like slaughtering all the whales and
well,
keeping an eye on Japan.
that was later,
and-
yeah.
Right, keeping an eye on those trade routes,
Right.
and it was a strategic point for the Russians. And then there's some Japanese fishermen that show up.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
it's got a very complicated. I'm only halfway through the book, and I know all that. You know what I mean? And I haven't made it all the way through the book. So the point where I'm at in the book is the Russians have sold them the island for a certain amount of that Spanish gold that they got from when the Spanish failed to.
The gold wasn't enough, so they have had 14 years of supplying Russia with wheat and wool from their sheep.
Because they had these superior
paid off.
sheep that
Yeah,
had the superior
just like
wool.
Australia, they have a really, I forget the Merlino sheep, is that one breed that's really good? Great wool, anyway.
Yeah, that happens to Ireland, that they get this like pure race of sheep.
I guess.
Yeah, Sardinia, off the coast of Italy, Sardinia claims to have the highest quality sheep on earth.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, there you go.
But, so they are at the point where they're sort of taken over their island back from the Russians, and the Russians are leaving and dismantling all this industrial stuff, but leaving many structures behind that they can then and they decide that they have to figure out
Government buildings, yeah.
how to make a government for themselves, like how to be like an official country now, right? And so they have to figure out how to make a government for themselves, like how to be like an official country now, right? And so they have to figure out how to make a government for themselves, like how to be like an official country now, right? And so they have to figure out how to make a government for themselves, like how to be like an official country now, right? And so they have to figure out how to make a government for themselves, like how to be like an official country now, right? And so they have to figure out how to make a government for themselves, like how to be like an official country now, right? And so they have to figure out how to make a government for themselves, like how to be like an official country now, right? And so they have to figure out how to make a government for themselves, like how to be like an official country now, right? And so they have to figure out how to make a government for themselves, like how to be like an official country now, right? And so they have to figure out how to make a government for themselves, like how to be like an official country now, right? And so they have to f They design a flag, right?
Yep, and they design their own
Coins.
flag and their coins.
There was a little railroad that the Russians used to transport stuff that they
Big
built.
railroad. See, the Russians after the 20s, into the 1930s, after the First World War, they started looking at the island as a strategic base more. And after World War II, especially with the U.S. getting involved in missiles and the nukes and all of this, have you ever heard of an island called Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean? It's a big military, it's a tiny island, but it's all military, and it's all tracking what the Russians are doing or what the Americans are doing. And so the Russians started building, they built a submarine base and then a tracking station, all hush-hush. But of course the islanders knew about it. And then the Russians said, okay, we don't need anybody to know about this island. It's going off all the maps.
Right.
And then the CIA got involved in 1960. And because they knew about the island, knew what the Russians were doing there, they just moved in. A boatload of spooks, we call them, and they call themselves that, landed on a remote part of the island and just took over this little point and built their own tracking station. And the Russians really couldn't stop it, but they made a deal, well, okay, we won't tell on you if you don't tell on us, and we're not going to fight you, and so on. But you got to take that island off your maps too. So the CIA, all Western maps, the island was dropped. So when you look at the World Atlas, well, there's no island there at all. Until 1992, and it was put back. So you'll see it.
So again, you probably fell into the fact that that was all fictitious, right, and not like an actual fact.
So
But,
that's why it's not an atlas.
but it's not on the maps. But so over at M3, we have several of the maps. We have the satellite view from 450,000,
450 miles.
450 miles up, and then there's a couple of the coastline maps, right? Of the those are off islands, right? Those are.
One of them is called Catherine Island, and it's offshore. And
It's an offshore
There's about
island.
5 or 6 large offshore.
And then the rainfall map and the actual location, I suppose it must have been in the 90s that map actually shows you exactly where New Island is, and it's pretty sizable, and it has the
Well, the locator map.
locator map.
Here's a tiny version.
There's a tiny version of
But it's
it.
bigger. Down.
You are here arrow on it and everything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my favorite little map.
So now that they own their own country and they've got a flag and they've sent a delegation out internationally, they fly into O'Hare Airport, a delegation of people from New Island, probably still wearing their wacky clothes.
Well, they dressed up a little bit.
They dressed up a little bit, okay. And they're going to meet with world leaders and get some advice on and they choose a political system, which was a partnership, right? Is that, what was it called?
Linking partnership. So
Linking
very
partnership.
laissez-faire government. Something we'd like to see, I think, a little bit more, where there are some ministers and there are these elders and there are some youngers. And the youngers are younger people who kind of oversee small villages in the outlying areas and neighborhoods in the bigger towns, and they go meet the elders a couple times a year and do these big sessions and try and figure out the newest way to legislate or anything that they need to be done. But it's not a top-down government. There's no president per se. The Minister of Trade is the one who goes to meet foreign governments and act as the dignitary. But other than that, if people just get along as well as they can and have to deal with, say, someone builds a feedlot next to a nursery school, well, you can't do that. You know? So
Right.
there'd be, it'd be handled on the local level. So there aren't any building codes, really. So if anybody's ever had to build a house or wanted to, and the stuff that goes on with building codes, I just decided, well, write them off.
Well, I wonder where they're putting the dispensary.
The dispensary.
You didn't include that. Okay. You didn't include that. I just had to get seedy for a minute. No pun intended. I just had to get seedy. Okay.
You can put
Enough
them
California
anywhere you want.
jokes. Let's not make fun of California.
You can put a dispensary if you want.
Anywhere on the island.
And here's the other thing too. like in California, there are so many rules about building a house because of earthquakes and too close to water or something like that. And so if you do that on New Island, well, if the earthquake, they don't have any earthquakes, but if you did have one, it's your own fault. You
Right.
didn't build it right. And if you build too close to the ocean and you get hit by a high wave, well, then it's your own fault. So people live in there.
Yeah, everything's very regulated in California.
So
The island moves away from the use of the ruble. They were actually using rubles for a while the Russians were there and
Right.
continued to do that for a while. They've invented a coin, but now they're looking at things like building resorts, inviting tourism, creating businesses, restaurants, and their own trade, their own sort of offerings,
very
right?
homegrown resorts, yeah.
Homegrown resorts.
No sandals or any of the
No.
cruise ship resorts. Cruise ships are not allowed yet.
Yeah. Cruise ships are not allowed yet.
There's too much of an impact on a local small population. When a cruise ship starts, well, a company that runs cruise ships starts, building a port and setting up or encouraging all the amenities that go along on shore for cruise ships.
Right.
It tears up places. You've probably seen that in the Caribbean.
Oh my God, absolutely, absolutely.
California.
I like those more local islands as opposed to the big touristy islands. There's a real difference between them.
So the part you're reading now is about the delegation who goes to first the U.S. They land in Chicago and they start touring around in a van at Chicagoland. I'm thinking, God, because it's so big and it's so sprawling and there's so much traffic. Everything is so small and minuscule. And then they go to other countries and they just talk to people. First they get the government's point of view, which they feel is a lot of skeptical about that. So they got the idea, let's just go to the bars in town and talk to people and see what they say.
Say what they want.
And trying to act like a local and just say, well, what do you think of this thing going on? And they'll get an earful. And so they put all that together, took it all home with them, decided about the cruise ships and a few other things like traffic. Gas is formidably expensive there.
Right.
So they rely on buses and the electric trains that the Russians built. The Russians built those for the military, by the way, not just for fun.
Right.
But they were there left over. What are you going to do? Well, I was like,
I mean, it's a really delightful read. It's really like a historic fiction, and you do kind of like weave in and out of the feeling when you're reading it. I recommend it to everybody. You weave in and out of the feeling that you're reading something actual, and then there's the magical otter that talks to people or something like that reminds you that this is imaginary. But there's not that much of that. It's really, you've thought it out like a real place, and it has the same problems
I'm
as
still
any
going,
real.
I'm rewriting that right now, almost finished, a third edition. This one's 10 years old already, or 8 years old. And so, new things. Climate change wasn't even a thing 8 years ago.
Right.
And rising sea levels is a bigger thing. And here's this island, So talk a little more about that. And unfortunately, I think you have, 3 copies of that?
I don't know exactly how many we have, but we have at least 3.
3 or 4 maybe. But we have a lot of maps. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this new book, this new edition, on Amazon. So for $10, you'll be able to buy it on Amazon. And the old way was I would have, like this one,
Traditional
I would
printer.
spend over $1,500 to get 200 copies printed at a place in Ohio. Then I had to ship them all, and I'm tired of shipping. I just don't want to do that. So this way, anybody can find the book on the internet, on Amazon, and once it's done, I got to get it to all of their specs and have it done right. And
Well, the other thing is that I want you to explain, and I want to go to and allow the audience to ask you some questions.
sure.
I
I don't want to take too long.
We want to mind our time, but I can buy land on New Island, can't I?
Correct. You
Yes.
can buy your own place.
Tell me how that works.
Well, if you have the map,
So if you're looking to invest some
and
money,
the guidebook, and you also you can get a little package including the map, a guidebook, the coins, and stamps, and a green card. So you're a citizen. And once you have these things, especially the map and the guidebook, you can just look over the island and think about what would I want to do there? Would I want to build a beach house or something, or farm in the hills?
and then this book has
Then
some
you
of
can-
these.
then you
So
can
you
buy-
obviously have some kind of interior design talent as well, because there are all these beach houses in this book. I don't know that these are on New Island per se, but I mean, he designs these incredible,
So I will do a
Views.
design or help you design your beach house or other place of your choice. I've had a couple people build farms, a couple of them, somebody built a house in Putney, the city, so they bought a lot on it for it. So you can claim a piece of land or a site. I don't call it land, and it's not real estate. This is just a building site on this island. And then, so I'll draw a plat map, you'll get a deed, and painting, if you will, of your place.
here's the daily traffic on the island. That's the road and the that's typical traffic on the island.
Right.
Nobody, huh?
No man. Well, Lee, I commend you. That's really amazing. I mean, read the book. It's just amazing. Get yourself the book and read the book, because it's really an amazing ride to weave in and out of something. It parallels real life, and so it's really hard to keep yourself in the fact that this is imaginary. You know, you start to believe it. You start to really just like kind of fall into it and believe it. So I commend you. I want to say also that Lee is represented by our permanent collection. We have 4 of his artworks in our permanent collection that were given to us over time. And so one of the reasons that I wanted to have him in an exhibit is because I think it's really important for the Miller Art Museum to continue to represent the artists that are still active and working on collections and working on their careers that we already represent in our collection. So seeing them as active people as opposed to people that are just being stored and pulled out and stored and pulled out, you know. So thank you for exhibiting with us. I'm gonna
You're welcome.
turn it over to the audience. If you guys have any, everyone's gonna be like,
Can I ask 2 questions?
sure.
I was just so enthralled with the exhibit at M3, and I don't know whether you remember, we started talking about this at the reception last week.
Okay, I remember you, yeah.
With your flag and the coins and the postage and the imagery. I would like to hear you tell us all about that, why you chose like the stars, and I was asking you about the small stars.
Smaller stuff.
And then my second question is totally irrelevant and maybe irreverent as well, but I'm intrigued by that shirt. What significance does it have?
This is an old stamped on library card.
Oh,
These are the old due dates.
yes,
So they
yes.
did it real graphically.
What appropriate thing to wear here today.
October 1984, 7th October. Yeah. One of my daughters gave this to me because I read a lot of books.
And here we are at the Miller. in the library.
Yeah.
What could be more appropriate?
And so your flag, how did they
Yes,
determine
okay.
the flag?
Well, some of the countries on the southern hemisphere have the Southern Cross star constellation in their flags. New Zealand and Australia, 2 of them. And so New Island is in the southern hemisphere, so I've adopted it. So that's the star formation, the little one and the 3 other bigger ones. There's also a 5th star in a couple of those flags. The stripes are the blue of the water, the blue of the sky, yellow for the land, and a red chevron stripe for the passion of islanders. That's where so I looked up flags one time, and every country has a long description of what their flags mean, what the symbols mean, all the shapes.
I feel like you brought a lot of skills to this. I mean, you did a lot of research. I mean, maps, carpentry, global politics. I mean, you know what I mean?
Also civilizations, that's always fascinating me.
Religion, there's a religion.
Religion, how we deal with religion.
Yeah.
It's comforting, it's real important to everybody, but sometimes it gets annoying.
Yeah.
So the islanders reacted to that too.
I might be talked into religion if an otter was my god. I might actually do that.
And also the symbolism on your coins and the postage. Would you talk a little bit about that? The currency?
The currency is, I'll trust you guys, I have 2 of these coins. I'm going to pass them around, you can take a look at them.
There's a pelican on one side, and then sort of a free-spirited woman on the other side.
Yeah, she's not too uptight.
She's not totally.
Just pass that around.
She's one of those old
Pass
school
it around. It's the size of a US 50-cent piece. And it was invented by a little company in Carmel, California a long time ago. And I carry a couple around in my pocket just to wear them down.
One Roger.
Yeah.
It's called a Roger.
I've got a question. Have you sold the movie rights? Because I want to see the movie. Maybe after this, you finish this new edition?
Well, yeah, I hope to.
Make a movie?
It'd be fun to get it out into a wider audience.
Gotta get a hold of Mike White.
Yeah.
Mike White.
He just produced The White Lotus. He's a movie producer, and he likes stuff like, you gotta get a hold of, and he likes islands. He did Survivor. He was a contestant on Survivor.
Well, it could be used as a backdrop, that's for sure.
He was also part of Lost. Mhm. So I believe, don't quote me on that, but I believe.
Write them and tell them.
Yeah, I will. I'm gonna get a hold of Mike White.
Cool. Yes,
You
sir.
have her sleep?
I just took a nap.
Do you know what? He
before-
sleeps in a tent with a flashlight. So then,
I was thinking that some of the ideas that he picked up, he woke up with.
yeah.
Those are things you dream, you get in a crazy dreams.
So both questions. Sometimes I usually sleep, but at 4 a.m. I often wake up.
Mhm.
And then my mind just starts going crazy about everything.
Mhm.
And rewriting that guidebook hit me at 4 a.m. about 2 months ago because it needs to be more available. And I couldn't do it the old way with me shipping them all out.
Yeah.
So with these nice tools that Amazon has these days, they will print a book full of color photos now. They wouldn't do that before.
Right.
So, anyway, I do
Okay.
sleep sometimes.
See if you remember what I was going to ask. Oh, two things. Where do we get the book if you only have 3 copies?
From your website, or that you'd have to
That's it.
ship?
You guys have the last 3 copies in existence.
Okay.
But here's
Better
my
get him
thought.
today and have him sign it.
Here's my thought. Let's make a list, start a list, and you guys, if you guys want a book, write your name in an email or some way to get a hold of it. Email would be easiest for me. I will, as soon as I get that up on Amazon, I'll send you all an email announcing its availability and a link or something to find it, and then you can just buy it on Amazon.
And we do have this book too. I don't know how many copies of this we
That's
have.
the end of that one too.
This is the last
They've
copy
both
of
been
this that we
running.
have.
I feel bad about that.
And then we have the maps and some
A lot of
postcards
maps.
and
The maps
stuff.
are what, $10 or something?
Yeah, the maps they're so great. I mean, when you start looking at the names, they're so clever. And thank you, Mr. Bleets.
You can get a basic idea of the history of the island and everything on the back of the map. It's just written on there.
Any other questions?
My
Yes, sir.
second question is, are you writing an autobiography, or is someone doing a biography of you?
Well, that's what this other book about, this art book is. It's autobiographical.
Yeah.
Starts when I was a kid and the disaster drawings and so on through years and years.
The figurative drawing that you
The
did.
figurative work and the waves, and then the New Island is a chapter in it. I wish I had more of these, and I have to, once I finish the guidebook, then I gotta get back and redo this one to make it available. There are a couple.
Yeah,
copies.
you're busy.
Yeah.
You need a good alarm clock.
And I'm writing a novel too.
Yes, sir.
How much is it for a site on the island?
How much is a site? If you go for the whole package, which includes a painting of your place and a deed and a plat map, that's all handmade, it's about $2,000. If we get fancier, it would be more, but around there. It's the time involved taking, talking and designing, because I have a little architecture background. Between art schools, I went to architecture school for 6 months and learned a little. So I'd be happy to.
Is that what these are? Are these paintings of people's places on the island,
They're
or
just made up.
those are just made up? But is that what that painting? So if I bought the package for $2,000, what would my painting look like?
You would have a largish painting, probably in watercolor, of your house in the site, on the island that you picked. So you'd see a beach or some features behind it that are on the map. and they would be listed. And then the plat map would be a detailed portion of New Island with your property marked on it, your site. And then this deed is one I type up on an old typewriter I have in my shop, and your name and the location and all that, like formal grant deed. And then you get the green card, the book, so I'll have more books by then. And then other paraphernalia.
Are there taxes?
Taxes.
What a great idea.
Do you pay taxes
On
once you
your
own?
site, once you-
No, that's the neat thing. There are no building codes, and there are no land taxes, property taxes.
It's free.
You're left alone by any powers that be. But you can frame your painting, and you can put up the deed if you want. Say, this is my place, and then people will ask you, well, where is it? Well, it's on this island in the Indian Ocean, and here it is. Here's a map. Okay. So they might believe it, they might not.
It's a nice gift for somebody who has everything.
Yep.
Yeah. And you can say, even Warren Buffett doesn't have a site on New Island.
That's right. Not yet.
Well, don't tell him. Yes.
Intriguing personality.
Well, you've got me started on this thing. I mean, this is the worst subject to get me started on.
Okay, well, I'm going to move on, but
Okay.
it seems to me that there are two different directions you're moving, although I see a correlation here. Your paintings are very specific and detailed, and they take hours and hours, I think,
Oh, you're right.
to complete.
Oh, yeah.
And this takes a lot of imagination and thinking and time as well. Given this project, where does your painting fit in, and do you ever feel an urgency in the midst of this to return to that? And then the second question is, I'm just intrigued with these, and I love them from here, but when I get up close, that's when they just really pop for me, because you see all of the exquisite detail work and the lighting, and I'm interested in how you accomplish that and how long it takes you to do that. And then I'm interested in terms of how you balance and integrate these two very consuming.
Well, that's a good question. I tend to need to do the New Island work, the writing and the mapping and the ideas, usually in the morning. And in the afternoon, I need to stop that and do the paintings. The paintings are a different part of my brain for some reason. And I think more meditative. Sometimes there's a couple of pencil drawings up there, and they're even more on the meditative side where I just sit and I draw, and after the original sketch is figured out, it's just hours of doing it, putting it in. Whereas this takes a lot more logical thought, I guess, how to write anything, and then how to form this history and make it all make sense so nothing is not working with something else. So it's the same day, one thing in the morning, usually the island, and then painting in the afternoons. And that's been carrying me along for quite a while now.
Painting such as one of these up here would have taken you.
Oh, the drawings at least a month each, 3 weeks, maybe 4, especially that one big drawing. The paintings, the double one up here is probably 6 weeks it took. That's the top, about 6 weeks. Outside of that 25-foot painting, that was months. But most of them are about a month or 3 weeks.
And I was also wondering how, when it's so long, how you go about laying it out on the canvas, because you had said your preparatory work is typically
A small sketch. Then I'll have a canvas in front of me and I'll look at the small one and usually a photo or two, sometimes 3 photos. So I'm trying to get this effect of the wave, and I'll just start drawing. And then once the drawing looks okay, I'll put it at the other end of the room and look at it from a distance. And if it's okay, then I'll start painting.
Well, we actually have to wrap this up because he has an appointment with our student art ambassadors.
All right.
Huh? We got 5 minutes, right? We're gonna have to rush him out the door. Thank you so much for being here.
You're a fun audience. It's been fun to do.
This is wonderful.